Hello, friends. I'm no therapist, but I'm your host, Stephanie Goodman. I'm a wife, a mother, a grandmother, and a woman of faith. Often friends ask me how I have a successful marriage while blending families and staying optimistic in life. This podcast features people with real-life stories about success in relationships and triumph over trial. Today on I'm No Therapist, we talk to an actual therapist, Carrie Wrigley, who is also an actress, singer, and author of the book Your Happiness Toolkit, 16 Strategies for Overcoming Depression and Building a Joyful, Fulfilling Life. Hello and welcome to another edition of I'm No Therapist, but I have on set with me today a dear friend of mine, and I'm excited to introduce to you Carrie Wrigley. And she has a bunch of letters at the end of her name, so let me look down at my notes here. It is LCSW. She is a counselor, a singer, a songwriter, an actress, a speaker, an author, and a mom of 5. And I like to add a Wonder Woman. Carrie, welcome to our studio.
Thank you so much.
Before we get moving on this, I would like to ask you, where are you from? Give me a little history of your story.
Sure. Basically, I'm from Sandy, Utah, which is where we ended up. We're still living in Sandy. So I started there and then ended up there through most of my marriage. So, I was the oldest of what ended up being 7 children. And when there were 4 of us, we were still in Sandy in the White City area, just as it was barely beginning to get built up.
Okay.
And then my father was asked by our local church to move our family to Nauvoo, Illinois, to be one of the original restoration architects for a historical project to restore that old city that has that our church has a lot of roots in. Huh. So we moved there for 2.5 years. Which honestly was a living hell.
Really?
Yeah. There were reasons that that those of our faith left at that point in time. There was a tremendous amount of hatred and ire, and that was not all gone by the time we went back. But it's been sweet over the years to see, what that restoration project has turned into, and the softening of the community, and people, coming to love Nauvoo and what it stands for. And in many ways, my father's work has been an inspiration for all the things that I've done, both artistically and otherwise, to take something that's kind of broken down and hurting. And when we got there, basically there was nothing there other than ruins. And mosquitoes and people who hated, people of faith, of our faith. And to watch it over the years transform into something different, gave me a lot of just inspiration for taking things that weren't in great shape and turning them into something better, Not to mention that Nauvoo was a hard place to grow up, and there was a lot of rejection, a lot of hurt, a lot of pain, a lot of conflict, a lot of trauma. It was a perfect introduction to becoming a therapist. No therapists have happy childhoods. It's just, we tend to be drawn in to try to understand our own situations better. Yeah. You are not a therapist, but I am.
That's exactly right.
And so in both of ththose ways, that early Nauvoo experience sort of educated that. And then we moved back to Utah after 2.5 years, and I ended up going to Olympus High and then Cottonwood High, or the other way around, Cottonwood High and then Olympus High, doing a lot of theater, which was my passion at the time. And all of the rest of the things you mentioned have actually happened in the last 30 years, growing into becoming a therapist and a mother of 5 and an author and a speaker and all those other things. I just wanted to be on stage. Yeah. It's been fun to see, all of the different, turns that this has taken. But all of those different things you mentioned end up essentially serving the same thing that I saw with my dad. Taking things that are hurting, taking things that are broken, and making them beautiful and hopeful and new.
Oh, and I'm so excited to be able to have this conversation with you. When I met you, it was actually at a preview of, let's see, what was it? It was Rockwell, I believe.
Oh, Porter Rockwell.
Porter Rockwell, yeah. Yes. And you played one of the honoriest women that I've ever seen. And I remember being a little bit intimidated about meeting you, and you are not that person at all. And, that says a good thing about an actress is that they can carry your heart, whether you love them or not. Mm-hmm. So I knew you as an actress. I had no idea that you were a counselor, an author, a singer, a songwriter.
Yeah.
I assumed that you were a mother,
mm-hmm.
but my goodness, you are a coat of many colors. And so going into your therapy, mm-hmm. What is it that made you decide to become a therapist?
Well, as I mentioned, I had that early childhood experience of, my parents' marriage becoming very strained, a lot of trauma and rejection, bullying in that area. Mm-hmm. It got me very interested in human pain on a personal level, because there was a lot I found that I personally needed to heal,
Yeah.
And even as a high school student, I knew that I was interested in dealing with people. And I kind of toyed with it even then. Shall I go into theater and sort of study people from the inside, or go into psychology and study them from the outside? So I went in kind of knowing that I had both interests.
Yeah.
So I did the theater major first, and then realized that I wanted a little bit more stability to my life than just only being an actress. I wanted a family life. That's hard to do, in the standard lifestyle and stuff. And even when I was a high school kid, I remember writing in my journal one day, after a series of experiences, we were kind of going through who am I and why am I here and what is my identity. And in a particularly soulful moment as a 17-year-old, I wrote the words, "I am a person who turns human straw into gold."
Ooh.
But I don't know what that means.
Yeah.
I don't know that there's any job description where you do that.
Uh-huh.
But I had completely forgotten that. I actually was reading that old journal just a few months ago, and I thought, oh my gosh, that's who I get to become. But in all those different avenues, and they all kind of blend together and balance each other and shore each other up. But yeah, again, just like I saw with my dad in Nauvoo, taking something that isn't in great shape, mm-hmm. Turning human straw into gold is what I do for a living in all of these different areas.
Oh my goodness, I love that. That brought up so many childhood feelings for me, to recognize that straw into gold. I remember that story was one of my favorites. I used to have my cousin tell me that story all the time. Tell me the story, Rapunzel, right? But yeah, what a beautiful analogy of taking what was and making it better, making it sparkle. Similar to my analogy of a caterpillar going through the chrysalis and becoming the butterfly. Change, right? Why is it that we fight change so hard in our lives? Why do we feel so picked on by the trials that we have?
I think it's just really scary when everything changes. I mean, again, you think of your beautiful analogy of the butterfly, which I've thought a lot about as well. And, it's a little critter crawling along, having a nice time, munching on leaves and, crawling on the ground and stuff. Life is good. And then all of a sudden, he ends up in this dark thing where he's constricted and there's no more munching leaves, that thing that he used to really like to do. And he's cut off from every other creature around him, and it's just this dark, constricted place, and he doesn't know how it's going to turn out. Now, obviously, caterpillars aren't all that sentient. They're not all that self-aware from what we understand. But, relating to that experience, I think we all tend, over the course of our life, sooner or later, we go into our chrysalises. And normally, we go into them at different times.
Yes.
The last 2 years, we've all gone in at the same time. And that's
the
first time in human history that's ever happened, that all of us have gone through this dark time all over the world at the same time.
Yeah.
And in some ways it's created a level of pain, anxiety, crisis such as we've never seen.
Right.
But I specialize in dealing with people in crisis. And I'll never forget the day in graduate school that they taught us about doing crisis intervention. Crisis is when life as you know it gets messed up.
Okay.
Right? When it's 9/11 when this building suddenly goes down, or it's the train wreck where the people suddenly die, or is it, but what they taught us about crisis is that the word crisis, I can't remember if it's Chinese, I think it's Chinese, is represented by two characters. One of those characters means danger, and the other means opportunity. And what they taught us in that instance, and I've thought about this ever since, is that in times of crisis, change, scariness, disruption, loss, grief, all those times in our life as we knew it is destroyed, it is a time of danger when things as we know it by definition have fallen apart.
Yeah.
But it's also a time of opportunity, because from the ashes of what was is the foundation of what will be, you know. The world as we once knew it is gone.
Yes.
But that creates the necessity of building a new one.
That's exactly right.
And so those butterfly wings that appear on that little caterpillar after that dark time, you know, or, you know, I remember 9/11 very specifically. Many of us do.
I do as well.
And at first, of course, it was just this disastrous, you know, these two buildings
Took
are
your breath
down
away.
and all these people are dead and people are screaming in the streets, all this kind of stuff. But even in as tough a place as New York City, I've never seen on you know, television as many references to love and to community and to family and to faith and to prayer. It's like that city, in many ways, in the ashes of that horrific attack, got reborn with a heart, you know. And in many ways, we got reborn with it.
Yeah,
you know?
I agree with that.
And so I think, of course, we fear change. We fear pain. We're designed to, you know, pursue pleasure and avoid pain as much as possible.
Right. This
and
is
so
true.
when we face painful things, disruptive things, hurtful, grieving sorts of things,
yeah,
when life as we know it is destroyed or disrupted, we're scared. We don't know how it's going to turn out. We don't have the eyes to see how things are going to be 6 months down the road or 6 years or 6 decades down the road.
right, yeah.
All we know is that the world as we know it is gone. That's it. And we're just in that dark, dark place like that chrysalis where it's just, you know, for that period of time, we don't know how it's going to turn out.
Right.
And so it's easy to lose hope and faith during that period of time.
Absolutely. And when you're in a place like that, how many times do you find people actually get to a place where they come to you?
Well, what I do know this, there are more and more people that need to come to me or someone like me who can't, either for financial reasons or because there's just not enough of us to go around, you know. I was talking to a religious leader just a couple of days ago that in his local community, he said 2 years ago, he had 2 people from his congregation in counseling. Now he has 19. And he can't find resources for them.
Yeah.
You know.
Yes.
And it's one of the reasons that I've been so intent these last couple of years, even before the pandemic. It was weird. In August of 2019 is when I published my book. I just felt driven that whole year. It's like I need to get these things out, especially for the people that can't afford counseling.
2019.
August 2019 is when it was published. I started writing it a year before that.
Wow.
And just to gather everything I'd learned for 30 years about, you know, how to help people through these hard times, through depression, through anxiety, through self-doubt, through addiction, through all this kind of stuff. Just what are the practical strategies that I'd found most useful, first to help myself and those close to me, and then over these 30 plus years, I've been a counselor. And so I gathered all of those, and it was hard. I self-published the book. It was expensive. It was really difficult. And, you know, there was a little bit of response to it right after it was published. And then, as typically happens on Amazon, things drop off and there's 50 other things that take its place. I'm like, why did I go through that?
Yeah.
And then March of 2020 happened. I'm like, this could be useful, you know? Maybe there's a reason that I felt driven to do this. And over these past, you know, several years, obviously, there's more and more people in that situation, you know, that are struggling and hurting and wondering if it's worth it and turning to addictions of every kind out of the pain of all of this.
And I think that the word happiness becomes obsolete. We don't hear it very often. Right. And to be able to give a pathway to happiness.
Yes.
This is a powerful book.
Yes, it is.
So you were a counselor for how long until you got the idea to write this book?
I think it was right about 30 years. I think I'm
really
about 3 years beyond that now.
Wow. And why did you decide to write the book?
I felt driven to it. And also because I've taught these similar kinds of ideas for the last 20 years at a summer event at a university, a religious university. And in the summer of 2018, I had taught that series of classes again. about dealing with depression, dealing with anxiety, strategies, practical strategies to help people through their difficulties. And after that series of classes, I had a number of people come up after, and they said, Carrie, please put this into a book. But don't write a religious book. Write one that's for everybody, a self-help book that everybody can relate to. And, there was a situation with one of my family members that occurred at the very same time that hit a crisis that, for a period of time looked like, would be a serious mental health issue. And that personal issue, that personal family member drove me even more than my classes to say, what is it that I do with people that helps the most?
Yeah.
And we kind of gathered them all up. I thought really, really carefully and identified these 16 strategies that had been useful for myself and for my clients all these years. And we applied that with that dear family member. And within 2 weeks, they were symptom free. Now, that doesn't happen with everybody,
That is
It's a pretty situational thing. But those are kind of the twin triggers, if you will, all the requests from my students, as well as that personal family experience that just said, I need to share this, because there's so many people that need this, and especially those that can't afford, professional help any other way.
Absolutely.
And even for those that are in counseling that can get professional help, they move ahead even faster if they have a guidebook to help, help them work through things between sessions.
This is a really good point. I love that you brought up that there was a personal experience, especially in getting your dream out there, right?
Yeah.
And moving forward with your achievement, you experienced what I call authenticity training, right? When you put that dream out there and you have adversity, now you get to figure out why you're holding on to that message. So if I'm coming to you and I'm wanting your services, tell me, what's that like? What will I experience?
Well, the first thing is just to, provide some basic information, where you live, phone number, all that kind of starting information. And then the very first session is more of a get acquainted session than anything else. It's called an assessment.
Okay.
And so we kind of go over some of the history and I always start with a question, what made you decide to come into counseling, and what are your goals for coming, and how can I help, And then I just let people write, and more often than not, they just talk for the whole hour straight, and I just type. And at the end of that, what used to happen is I would just type, and then more often than not, they use up half my Kleenex box in the process of that first interview.
Yes.
And then at the end, before the book, we would kind of look at each other and say, okay, well, that's a really good starting place. We'll see you next week. But I didn't feel very satisfied with that. So even before the book, I started giving people at least simple assignments that they could start to do. Maybe it's clean up their diet a little bit, because diet has everything to do with brain health. And most people don't even recognize that. But, who can't decide to eat an apple rather than a donut in the morning? It's, or to, drink water rather than, Diet Coke all day, or whatever it might be, So I'd start with some simple assignments and some simple assessments, keep a mood log, keep a gratitude journal, whatever, some simple assignments that people that I could describe to people at the end of that first session within the last 5 minutes or so they have something to do. Rather than
tools to take home.
Right, some tools to take home, rather than just sit home and think all over again about their trauma and all the pain that they just passed on to me. Because they need to tell their story.
Yeah.
By and large, that first session is about them telling their story and sharing their pain. But if that's all that they do, my experience is they go home and they feel worse. I don't want them to feel worse. I want them to feel more hopeful. So yeah, from the very first session, I give them things to do. That's just become way, way easier now with the book, because all the things to do are under one cover, and I can just sort of go to chapter this and work on tool and such, and they have a lot more detail, or they can read a whole chapter so that they're better prepared for the next time. Because, a lot of counseling is pretty much, I call it poor dear therapy.
Okay.
Poor dear therapy is, oh, poor dear, that's really sad that happened to you. And what else terrible happened to you? And how do you feel about that? And when else have you felt that terrible? And before long, after a few weeks or months or years or decades of that kind of therapy, you feel even more broken and even more dysfunctional than you started,
And what do you think the reason for that is?
Because it's easy. And it's because it's the first thing, because at the end of the day, a good counselor has to listen first. So that literally is the first thing they teach you in counseling school. How to listen, how to, give reflective listening statements, how to validate people's feelings. Super important. And if you don't do that, if somebody just say, well, here's what we need to do to fix that, and you don't feel like they care about you, it's not effective, So that's a really important component. But I've heard from so many of my clients that if people do that and only that, they end up feeling even more hopeless, even more broken, even more in despair,
I agree.
So the very first piece is building that connection with the client, hearing their story, hearing their pain, hearing what their needs are, and then starting to lay out a path. And again, it's way easier now with a book because I'm like, we have these 16 things. You're not going to master them all in the same first week. It's going to take some time. But I know how to get you through this, and it's not just because I'm brilliant. I spent many, many years studying other people's, research and gathering the ideas from people that have been working for decades to develop these ideas. I just kind of consolidated them all together in this integrated toolkit that I assembled from lots of different sources. So I let people know you're not going to feel all better because you were here this first time, In fact, you may feel a little worse the first time because it's hard to let yourself actually feel what you've been feeling and say what you've been saying, But there's a path through this. And so I give them some of the first steps of the path. And then in subsequent sessions, then based on whatever their needs were the first time, then we spend less time, quote unquote, whining. And talking about pain and more about, okay, so let's find a particular kind of thought pattern, a particular kind of behavioral pattern, a particular issue in your relationship, and give you some tools to improve that particular thing, And so literally, the subtitle of my book includes the phrase building a joyful, fulfilling life. And that is exactly, in fact, when I got my cover done, because again, I self-published, so I had to find my own designer and stuff, and so he liked the major title, Your Happiness Toolkit, but then the subtitle is 16 strategies for overcoming depression and building a joyful, fulfilling life. Yes. He says, let's just end with the overcoming depression. That fits nicely on the page. I said, that's only half the thing. I don't want just people to feel less depressed. I want them to know how to move on to actually build happiness. That's the whole point.
Yes.
Yes. And that actually was an insight that came from a really insightful psychologist by the name of Martin Seligman, who's the father of what's become known in the last several decades of positive psychology, which I really, really love. He was the one who said, when he became president of the American Psychological Association in the year 2000, he's like, we spent the last century as psychologists figuring out what's wrong with everybody and being able to, assess diagnoses and look at pathology. And he says, I suggest in the next 100 years, we get better at looking at what makes people thrive, what makes them flourish, what makes them build happy, wonderful lives of closeness and integrity and responsibility. Right. How do we build that? That's basically the idea with positive psychology. And so Martin Seligman has been a really, and his work has been a really important thing for me. And that whole idea of building stuff that's positive. But it was actually Martin in one of his early books, from when he was doing therapy in the, late 90s or whatever, that had a number of clients that would say, okay, so doc, I appreciate your help. It's true, I feel less depressed, but I just still don't feel happy. And that was when he said it was a wake-up call for him that not being depressed, not being anxious, not being addicted, not having a diagnosable mental health disorder isn't really the goal. It's just halfway there, The way I represented that in my book is completely miserable, whether it's depression or anxiety or whatever, is -3. Neutral, not depressed, not anxious, we're just kind of managing that 0. Actually happy is 3. And you can be anywhere on that continuum. From day to day, from moment to moment. And so the goal is not to get to 0 and stay there. The goal is to get to 0, to be depression-free or anxiety-free or whatever, and then start building in a positive way until you get to that 3. And having specific tools, step by step, to be able to guide you in that direction.
Yes. So when a couple comes to you, I'm guessing that you really focus on family situations or marital situations. What is it?
I do all of it. I would say I probably do about 60% of my work with individuals.
Okay.
But even those individuals have family situations they're talking about.
Okay.
I learned in a family therapy setting that I worked in a number of years ago, even if there's just one person there, you're still treating a family. Because that person's behavior, thoughts, moods, everything will influence that whole family.
Absolutely.
So about 60% of my work, I would estimate, happens one at a time with people. And then I would say probably another 30-ish% is with couples. And then the last 10% or so, I would say, is with family groups, And there's other therapists that have a different mix, but that's how it is for me. So
Okay.
then you had a follow-up question for what I do with...
Yeah, well, I was wondering what draws someone to pick up your book? Is it that they're going through a crisis of life? Is it that now that they're older, memories are coming back and they're realizing, I had a crappy life.
Mm-hmm.
And now I've got to make a choice to either be bitter or better.
Mm-hmm.
Are these the kind of people that come into your presence, and are these the kind of people that you feel would benefit from reading your book?
Absolutely. I would say that's the first group, people who hurt emotionally over something. And again, it might be the kind of situations you mentioned. It might be they're feeling depressed or anxious or struggling with low self-esteem, or they're struggling with a pornography addiction or some other kind of addiction, or even a food addiction, which has become, one of the most pernicious and widespread addictions we have, along with media addiction. And it's taken over their lives, or it's destroying their marriage, or whatever, or they're worried, they're fighting more with a spouse or with a child, or so in some way they're in pain, they're not happy. Mm-hmm. So that
and it's
is
affecting their life and
absolutely
their relationships.
Yeah. So that is the first group of people that would be interested in something like this.
Okay.
The second group of people are people that are doing okay themselves right now, but they're worried about a loved one who's going through something. So they're worried about their sister who's depressed, or they're worried about the person that they're serving in a church capacity who's struggling with anxiety and they don't know how to help, or they're a therapist themselves, that was like me 30 years ago, that doesn't know what the heck they're doing, and all of a sudden these people are sitting in front of you saying, hey, you need to help, and we're like, okay, I just barely got my degree, I don't know what I'm doing yet. But with a resource like this, you can learn a lot quicker. So helping individuals may be drawn to the book. And I actually have a lot of people that read it first before they give it to the troubled family member, or the troubled person, the troubled client, or the troubled, person in their church they're trying to help, or whatever it is. So the struggling people, second, helpers. And then third are people that are reasonably happy now, doing okay. Yeah. And they want to keep it that way. Thank you very much. Self-improvement, maintaining wellness. Mm-hmm. Which, of course, has become more of an issue the last 2 years than ever before, because the world is harder than it has ever been before. Yeah. In many ways, it's a struggle. It's uncertain, and so even if somebody's safely on that continuum, they're safely at 0 or 1, they want to make sure they're not sliding back to that -1, -2, or whatever. And so to be able to tell the difference, those 16 strategies are basically, 16 ways to move toward the 3. Okay. 16 ways to actively build mental wellness, physical wellness, confidence, all that kind of stuff. And then for each of those 16 things, there's the opposite. There's something that extends toward that negative side, toward the -3. So for example, the very first of those 16 strategies is action. Engage in positive action that loves you back. Do something that you love doing.
Okay, let's go into that. Mm-hmm. Let's talk about action that you love. Yeah. How do you find that? How do you find your way?
I actually, one of the easy ways to do it is get a hold of the book or the workbook and fill out the little one-page summary I have. Basically, I've looked at a lot of different types of interest areas, and then specific, actions within those interest areas. You just literally checkbox it, Or you can talk to people around you and say, hey, what do you think I'm good at? What does it seem to you, makes me happy? Or you think back over the course of your life, things that you enjoy doing that make you happy, or that you used to enjoy doing. Yes. One of the things that happened with COVID, of course, is that a lot of the things we used to get to do that made us happy suddenly disappeared, Suddenly, again, there's nothing that makes me happier than being able to act. Both theater and film pretty much died for a year to 2 years.
Yes, this is true. And speaking.
Exactly. And so, all my speaking engagements suddenly were gone. I couldn't go to the gym anymore. Yeah. Couldn't go to dance class anymore. Couldn't even go to acting class anymore. Those are some of my happy places. Others of my clients couldn't participate in their teams anymore. So many of my teenage clients didn't get to go to school anymore, didn't get to graduate in 2020. So many of the kinds of contexts that used to make us happy before
that we looked forward to.
We looked forward to, and just a normal part of our happiness package blew up in 2020.
This is true.
A lot of them are coming back now, thankfully. A lot of the things that we didn't used to get to do, now we're getting to do again. But even, what I find a lot with people in the midst of change, like people that, like I have a number of widows, for example. Yes. That used to love to go camping with their husband But now he's gone.
Right.
They don't want to go camping by themselves in dark woods without him to lug around the firewood and keep them safe from the bears, all that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
You know, for example, you know, or the person, you know, the retiree who used to love to go to their job and make a difference and be rewarded financially and in terms of attaboys and stuff like that for the good job he or she was doing, and then suddenly they're retired and the job is gone and they don't know what to do with themselves.
That's a really good point.
Or the high school graduate that used to love to, you know, do the theater productions or you know, go to play practice or go to football practice or whatever, and now they've graduated and they don't know what to do.
Right.
Transition.
Yes.
Even normal transitions like that, happy transitions we look forward to, you know, graduation, retirement, having a new baby, last baby leaving home, you know, marriage, divorce, all of them, you know, even transitions we want and look forward to can be massive triggers for depression, anxiety, for those reasons, you know, because kind of like we talked about with the caterpillar, the world as we know it just blew up, even if it's for a happy reason.
Right, yeah.
And I think so much of what we call postpartum depression, some of it's hormonal, some of it's about not insufficient self-care, but most of it, I think, is about transition. The world as she knew it just blew up. Her body as she knew it no longer exists.
Correct.
Her marriage, her sex life, her professional life, what she sees when she looks in the mirror, suddenly nothing is the same anymore.
Right. And the demands on her is she's never experienced before.
Exactly.
That's
And then she
really
feels guilty half the time because she's like, well, I should be happy because I have this beautiful baby. I should be grateful is what I've always looked forward to, but I hate my life. And I shouldn't hate my life because I have this beautiful... So then you get into another of the depressive triggers I talk about, which is conflict, including internal conflict.
Oh,
you know?
yes.
And so some of these just normal life experiences, I mean, certainly if people have been sexually abused or if they went through, you know, domestic violence situation or if their husband died traumatically in a crash last week, of course they're going to, you know, have some emotional struggles.
Sure.
But what I find is the majority of people that end up coming in for my help now, you know, don't necessarily have to have those big ticket triggers in order to have big ticket emotional impact. A lot of times it's just really normal experiences of life, especially now exacerbated by the impact of you know, the changes with COVID.
Yes.
You know,
Yeah.
and just learning how to find new things to love. Again, getting back to the action strategy, you know, that woman may not be able to go camping with her husband anymore now that he's dead. You know, it's kind of hard to do that, you know. But, you know, with that particular woman, we found some other friends she could do things with. We found, you know, some groups associated with, you know, wilderness trails and stuff like that she was able to get involved with. And so it's kind of harvesting up, you know, what you used to love to do and then kind of resurrecting it, rebuilding it in the new context, you know.
Yeah.
And so that's as opposed to, so that's, you know, action builds happiness. The opposite of that builds unhappiness is inaction, which more often than not is either, you know, the worst version of inaction, of course, is what in my business we call rumination, which happens a lot of times with real serious depression, where you just kind of sit there and look at the wall and think about all the ways you failed and all the things that are wrong with your life and all the things that will never work out. And, you know, that's the most serious version, but it's not the most common version.
Yeah.
The most common version is this. You know, it's basically media assisted blankness.
Okay.
You know, where we're not actually thinking about anything, we're not actually doing anything.
I believe that I'm guilty of that.
I think almost all of us are guilty of that. You know, but pretty much especially again since COVID, if it's not our phone, it's TV. If it's not TV,
Correct.
it's
iPad.
it's
A
CNN.
laptop.
It's you know, 24-hour sports or
This is
24-hour
true.
news.
We
or
are
it's video games.
inundated
We are absolutely
with
inundated.
electronic entertainment.
And here's the thing: inaction, whether it's just sitting on the couch ruminating or it's inaction because you're sitting on the couch watching your drug of choice, is bad for your mental health. Terrible for your mental health. And one of the most simple but powerful things I can get people to do of any age, you know, from the youngest child to the oldest adult, is stop doing inaction and move toward some kind of action. And yeah, they do have to identify for them what is that, you know. I love speaking and going to acting class and singing. Some people would be terrified to do any of those things. My son loves to go mountain biking. Every time I go, I get hurt. It's not my favorite thing. It's not on my happy list, you know?
Yeah, right.
And so different people are going to enjoy different things. And it's actually a really fun thing with clients to be able to help them discover or rediscover or reinvent what those actions are. There's a woman here in our community that is famous as a songwriter. Some of your listeners will recognize her name, Janice Cat Perry.
Yes.
That has written some wonderful songs known all over the world in many, many languages. She didn't start that way. She didn't start writing till she was in her early 40s.
That is such an incredible
story. And it was such an interesting thing to read her autobiography, because basically she used to love sports. She did a little bit of piano, a little bit as a kid, in her mom's house or whatever. She went to school, didn't really have any time for music, got married, had kids. They didn't even have a piano, She continued to do sports with her kids. She played soccer and, kind of intramural teams until in her early 40s, with some of the changes of aging and stuff, she started getting hurt more and more often. And so her husband, in his kindness, said, honey, maybe you need to start thinking about another little hobby. And at that same period of time, in her local church group, they said, hey, sister so-and-so, could you come and do the local road show? And she was put in charge of creating music and pulling something together for a bunch of teenagers to stand on stage and make fools of themselves.
Right.
On this church stage.
Yeah.
And between those two things, she discovered this whole new hobby that has, over the recent decades, made her a worldwide, loved, known songwriter. Yes. She didn't even think about that for years. And so being willing to reinvent ourselves, it's another version of the butterfly story, She was perfectly happy as a soccer playing little, caterpillar.
This is true.
And now she's this beautiful butterfly that her work is known all over the world.
And she probably felt like her world was coming to a close around her when she wasn't able to be as active anymore.
Right. Absolutely.
What am I going to do?
Yeah. The end of the world as you've known it is the beginning of the world that's yet to be.
Ooh, yummy.
Yeah. I wrote that into a song when I was feeling pretty desperate about same with the changes in my life with COVID. Music for me has been one of those things that lifts me up when I'm down. It's one of my happy places, one of my actions, and so, lines like that, they give me hope, It's like
words
if I can see something different.
So powerful.
They are.
This is what I've been enjoying right now, is to start embracing how powerful words are and the words that I use. In other words, replacing should for could or would, right? Yeah. Such a small difference, but such a huge change. When I first learned the idea of exchanging words was bitter or better, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
I was in the middle of my divorce and being a single mom, and now I've got to make a choice. Am I going to let this make me a bitter person or a better person?
And I would add a third option, because I've thought the same thing, those two words, bitter or better. Unfortunately, there is a third option, and more people are choosing it. It is broken. Because there's some people that they don't be. Yeah, they don't get bitter. They just kind of get broken. They just get kind of hopeless. They just get engaged in inaction. They just kind of think that nothing's ever going to work out. There's no point in doing anything whatsoever, and they're just literally broken by it. Which, it's bad to be bitter, but at least bitter is active.
Yeah,
broken. I think is a state that's happening to more and more and more of us, including more and more of our youth.
Absolutely.
That are losing hope, literally losing hope of life.
Yeah.
And so having, a specific guide, to be able to identify how do you build something beautiful and positive and happy, even in a post-COVID world, a post-9/11 world, a post whatever we're going to going through next world.
Yeah.
Human beings have dealt with adverse situations since the first human being walked the earth. We deal with different things now. We don't have to worry about the saber-toothed tiger coming and, eating our children.
Yeah.
We don't have to worry about smallpox, taking away half of our civilization. We don't have to worry about crossing, a mountain plains in a covered wagon or anything like that.
This is true.
We deal with completely different kinds of adversities and challenges.
Yeah.
But it's one of the reasons I really love being involved in acting, because being able to step for a few minutes into somebody else's shoes, somebody else's problems, somebody else's, strengths and weaknesses, and being able to see how they kind of navigate through that gives me hope for my own shoes and my own struggles and my own strengths and weaknesses.
Right.
Because so often it's something that I learn from one of those other characters that I play, or even somebody that I just read about, or somebody that I see in a movie or something. It's like, well, they got through that, and so I can get through this, even though our challenges are different.
I have seen some of the clips of you practicing some of your skits, and I have always enjoyed the different plethora of characters that you bring. And I mean, there are some that you think that you're sane and you have this great plan, and then suddenly the sinister comes in. Yeah. So fun for you to play, I'm sure. And I'm guessing that you probably grab some of those characters from your experiences.
Absolutely.
And hold on to them in your heart.
Yeah.
Oh, that's so neat. And I love that you chose to experience some of these things, because that's what makes you valuable. You're relatable to others that are going through, because sometimes we feel like we are so alone in that. So going back to your book here, what are some of the steps of finding yourself when you are broken?
I think the first thing is to recognize that if you're broken this minute, it's understandable based on what you've just been through. But being broken today doesn't mean being broken forever. And that is a really different message than people get from a lot of other counselors or mental health professionals, or certainly medical professionals. If you take my little 5-item depression test today and you score 4 of those 5 items, then I'm sorry, you have a chemical imbalance. There's something wrong with your brain, and you need to be on our product the rest of your life. If you're broken today, that means you're broken. Sorry.
You're done.
And that's what happened to my family member, that was going through a difficult time. And, this person was actually in a different country, when this quote diagnosis was made. And I've never heard such a scary sound as that person's voice on the phone. And they literally said, I'm broken and I need to come home. I'm mentally broken. And they were. But 2 weeks later, they weren't broken anymore, And since then, they've been getting through college, they've been dating, they've been building a life, And so the fact that you feel broken today, it may be absolutely accurate at the moment. But again, you can kind of think of, we've talked about the caterpillar, who literally they have to break their chrysalis to get out and be the butterfly.
Correct.
Or similarly, you can kind of think of a chick that literally has to break that safe harbor of that little shell that they've grown up in order to get out. Things have to break before they change. So if you're broken today, it just means you're in the process of moving to the next thing. That's it. It doesn't mean you're always going to be stuck in a broken chrysalis or a broken egg, or it just means right now you're going through that stage in life where things are massively changing. And that can be really scary, but it's less scary if you draw on the experience and the wisdom of other people who've been through it before. That's basically what I did in pulling the book together. It's like all these different therapists that worked with these hundreds, thousands of people that at some point had been broken. What got them through? What helped them? What are the strategies that they applied in a practical way?
Absolutely. I think that's so powerful. And I know that a book like this would be so useful. I can see myself using it in so many different levels. Going through a divorce, or being a mom and the children, the choices that they're making, or me losing my way, so many different avenues
and the truth is,
this book.
There's not a single person on the planet at this point that hasn't been through a major catastrophe the last 2 years. We're all rebuilding our lives. We're all crawling out of that broken place saying, okay, so what's next? And there's a war on the horizon. Is that going to turn? I mean, there's nobody that can't be helped to be a little bit happier than they are today, whether they're -3 miserable, or they're just kind of at the -1 kind of worried or upset.
Yeah.
Or even if they're at a 0 or a 1, they're reasonably content, but there's things all of us can do to build even happier lives. And as we do that, as we become radiant examples of happiness, it doesn't just lift us, it lifts those around us, particularly our families and others that are close, So it's kind of like, you can kind of think of it like physical health,
Okay.
You may not be dying today of diabetes or heart disease or cancer. You may be, a little pudgy here and, maybe not as much energy as you want. So maybe your health is maybe a -1. It's not a -3. Or you might even be a 1. You might be out walking every day and, able to do some stuff. But maybe you want to be as tough and lean and strong and resilient and, strong endurance as you can. So you go to a gym or you join a new program or whatever. Even a 1 can, has some area to go. And there's joy in that. there's joy in moving toward being the best version of yourself that you can be.
Right.
And that joy, again, is contagious. It's very well known that depression is contagious. For a long time, people thought that meant, oh, it must be in the genes because everybody in this family is depressed. Well, there may be something to that, but they've discovered that the same level of depression contagion is just as strong in people who aren't genetically connected. For example, spouses, for example, roommates, for example, dating partners, friends, people at work.
Okay.
Depression is contagious. But so is joy. So we get to decide which piece of, on that continuum we want to focus on and that we want to extend to those around us.
Yes.
And be an influence in either direction.
Exactly. I would love to hear some stories and examples of some of these techniques that you've used in your own family and the changes that you have seen.
Well, I think one of the most important for me in my own family growing up was strategy number 6. It's called identity.
Okay.
And it's based on a personality test that many, many people use, but the way that I use it is different than it's ever been expressed before because it's much more precise. It's based on the Myers-Briggs Type Indicator, MBTI, which a lot of people have used. And it basically helps you get at that question you asked before. How do you know what you're good at, what you like to do, what will bring you joy?
Right.
The personality tests are a really great shorthand for that. But part of the pain that we experienced as a family growing up, I finally realized as a 19-year-old when somebody showed me that tool, was because my parents are as opposite personalities as they can be. And particularly when we hit that crisis of being put in this new place, Nauvoo, which I mentioned at the beginning of our discussion. Dad's personality is, again, he's the architect, the visionary, the person that can look at this disastrous thing and envision the beautiful thing it's going to become. My mom is hands-on, practical, tell you how it is, bold. If she doesn't like it, you're going to know, Okay. And those kind of conflicts, first between them and then that kind of spread out to all of us, end up being significantly painful. Well, once I got a hold of the personality test at 19, first of all, I understood myself better. And I'm just simply way more like my dad than I am like my mom. I could never understand why I didn't feel that close to her and why she liked my brother better. And I finally realized he's almost exactly like her. Wow. So of course they relate to each other more, And I know she was jealous of my relationship with my dad. Same deal. There's just, out of the 4 elements that test measures, there was only one that she was different than my brother and that I was different from my dad. So, whereas we were pretty much opposite from each other, whereas once you know what you're dealing with, it's kind of like understanding dog breeds.
Okay.
You've got a cute little fluffy Shih Tzu next to you.
I do.
He's just sitting here, just kind of resting
Chill.
and whatever. My dog would never do this. My dog is a border collie mix. We were told his other half was queen collie. I later found out there's no such thing.
Collie.
There's no such thing.
Okay.
And so the vet
I've
thinks,
never heard of a queen collie.
No such thing. But I was dumb enough. Oh, collie, lassie. I know what lassie is.
Right.
But even border collie. These guys are bred to be sheepdogs, to herd things, to run, to be active, to whatever. I didn't know that. I just envisioned cute little lassie. Be fluffy. You could hug and he licks your tears.
That's right. And he would take you to the lost person and save your life.
Right. So that's what I thought collie meant.
Yeah.
That was my expectation. And then queen collie. That sounds even better. That totally sounds like lassie. Well, this lassie is not who I got. I got a little border collie mix that the vet thinks the other half is probably Jack Russell Terrier.
Oh.
Yeah. And I didn't
hyper.
Very hyper. At the time, my kids loved the little children's show Wishbone.
Yes,
and Wishbone, this little Jack Russell
Smart
Terrier,
dog.
was just very smart, very intelligent, solving all these mysteries, jumping up and down and going all around. When we first got this dog, we thought, what the heck is wrong with this stupid dog? Because he was constantly running away. I mean, he would literally run through the neighborhood for like hours at a time, dodging cars and everything. If other children would come over to play with our kids, he'd start herding them. I'm like, what is wrong with this dog?
He would hurt them.
Well, we finally, got a brain and looked up his breed and figured it out. I mean, he's a totally normal little border collie Jack Russell Terrier. He could no more sit there and sleep, during a podcast. When I have to record something in my house, I have to take him to the neighbor's house or something because he's just even now in his old age, he's just really active. This little cute Shih Tzu, you're not going to want to make him the guard dog to protect your house at
No.
night. No way.
He is not.
For that, you're going to need like a German Shepherd. And what I finally realized with the personality test is, should I give away my dog because he's not a Shih Tzu, or he's not an actual Collie, or he's not a German Shepherd? No. I get to love him and cherish him and appreciate him for exactly who he is without changing a thing. And, if there were one thing, and in fact do this with almost every couple and family that I do the personality test and help them learn to value themselves and others for who they legitimately, authentically are. Rather than thinking, oh, you're not like me, therefore there's something wrong with you, and I need to correct who you are and how you think and how you do everything, which is what we tend to do otherwise. I call it psychological bigotry,
Interesting.
Of course, sexual bigotry, based on gender, racial bigotry, religious bigotry, they're very painful. They're very destructive, and appropriately in the last few decades, we've tried to take some steps to eradicate them, Psychological bigotry, I think, does even more harm, because even more than the color of your skin or the shape of your eyes or the particular kind of church you go to or whatever, personality is about fundamentally who you are.
Yeah.
And if we judge and reject each other for who we fundamentally are, that causes a deep kind of wound that requires some deep recovery.
Right.
But what I find is that personality test, that's in tool number 6, is a fantastic antidote to all of that. Helping people love and respect and cherish themselves and others around them. So that's one example.
I know that I personally have always loved to take the personality tests. When you said personality tests, check these, I went back to junior high.
Yeah.
Like pulling out the magazine and doing the questionnaires and then finding out who I am.
Yeah.
But also I have always loved knowing who you are and how I can support you best. And knowing my children and recognizing that they have different energy, they have different talents, they have a different story. And I have to do my part, especially as a mom, to allow them to do that and not try to make them take a border collie and turn them into my Shih Tzu.
Right.
I think that's the hard thing about being a parent, is allowing our children to become. Yeah.
And that's one of the things that I cherish the most, with the work with the personality test and that whole thing is helping parents understand that the things a lot of times they judge most harshly in their kids, they really are built-in traits, and they're the source of that child's deepest gifts and their most substantial contribution to the world. And learn to make peace with that and to appreciate it rather than resent it is one of the most powerful things I can do for a parent-child or for spouses with each other or whatever,
Back to the straw into gold.
Yes.
Right?
Yeah. I would say one of the other tools, and this one's easy to describe, that makes the most difference both personally and within families, is tool number 3. And this is not a newsflash. So many of these tools are just everyday common sense things you just never really thought have a whole lot to do with your mental health, but they do. And this one is just simply positivity. There's almost nothing that can be more powerful in turning around depression, turning around conflict in a relationship, whether it be again with a child or with a spouse or whoever, than learning to put more focus on the things that are positive in that individual, whether oneself or someone else, And so things like gratitude journals and things like learning to identify positives and articulate them. I remember one time when I was a teenager, hearing a speaker joke about this. He was kind of a funny guy, and he said, it's so important to identify the positives in your kids, even if it's really hard. If they're kind of, bratty, rebellious teenagers or whatever, and you just, son, I really, really love the way you breathe so consistently in and out every single moment of every day. I can just always depend on you to keep breathing. It made us all laugh.
Talk about gratitude, starting at the lowest level.
But I find one of the simplest but most powerful things I can do. This is a lot of times one of the things I'll have people do from that very first session, because you can describe this in 30 seconds. Every single day, starting today, write down 3 positive things.
Okay.
And then if your struggle is with somebody else, then one of those positive things has to be about that person.
Oh, interesting.
So if your child's driving you crazy, every single day you need to notice something positive about that kid. It could be something funny they said, something that you appreciate that they did, something that they did at school, or some overall trait, you know.
Yeah.
Or just that they're cute. Their hair shines and when it's tousled in the sunshine or whatever. If you're mad at your spouse, then one of those three things has to be about the spouse. You get extra points, and extra impact if you actually tell the person you're upset with what that positive thing is. At least, maybe not every day, but every so often, It's absolutely amazing how just noticing, having eyes to look for the positive things, enough to write them down, and ideally to speak them, starts to change the chemistry, the dynamic, of our hearts and of our relationships. Mental illness is a lot of times thought of as chemical imbalance. And it is, but we assume that the commercials are right, and it's just this scary cloud that comes upon us out of nowhere, that we're defenseless, and all we can do is take medication to make the cloud go away. What I find is chemical imbalance is generated from everything. It's generated from what we do or don't watch, on TV or Netflix or on Instagram. It's affected by what we listen to with music. It's affected by how positive or negative we think. It's affected by the quality of our relationships. It's absolutely affected by the food and drink we put into our mouths and whether or not we get up and exercise if we're just sitting there. All of that affects us chemically. Every single one of these 16 things affects us chemically. And so it's been really interesting over the years to find the research that has indicated that when people move in these directions toward those positive traits, those positive strategies, it literally changes their brains in observable, measurable ways that pretty much replicate what happens with antidepressants, with this important difference. Now people know how to do it for themselves and to keep it that way, as opposed to something that's sort of this chemical Band-Aid that only works as long as you take it, and sometimes not even then, and then side effects and all this kind of stuff.
Yeah.
Teach it. You can kind of think of it like, learning to ride your own bike rather than constantly have training wheels. Or learning to, let your leg recover so you can walk on your own rather than always being in a wheelchair or a walker. Some people, can't do that. But for emotionally, I find most people that have some of these kinds of afflictions, depression, anxiety, they've been told, oh, I'm sorry, you have a chemical imbalance. They assume, again, broken today means broken forever. Time after time after time after time. I've seen that not be true. When people do what works, it works. When they do what keeps them sick, they stay sick. It's as simple as that.
It really is.
And so to have it laid out so very clearly, so on a daily basis, people can make small, teeny tiny decisions that lead them in the direction of wellness and resist those decisions that they know will lead them even deeper into their depression, their anxiety, their conflict, whatever. It's so powerful. And they're such simple, powerful things.
Oh, I love that. Do you have a section that you focus on? For instance, I am very passionate about the power of forgiveness.
Forgiveness shows up in tool number 15, which is connection. Now, I'll tell you in general, out of the 16 strategies, one is the easiest, which is strategy 1, action. We do that literally in utero. We know how to do that already.
Interesting.
16, the hardest one, is healing from the pain of the past.
Okay.
Tool number 15 is connection, which is building, positive quality relationships, and forgiveness is part of that, And so there's unquestionably, and the way people talk to each other, and the way they listen to each other, and the way they learn to, compromise with each other, and a bunch of different things. There's a lot of things in that chapter. And so that's, at some point, chapter 15 needs to grow into its own book. And I have that planned, the relationship toolkit.
Yeah.
So right now it's a 1 chapter, and like I say, the other, what I find is if people try to fix their relationships before they fix their hearts, their minds, their personal habits, it blows up.
That's exactly right.
And so when people get their thinking in place, their health in place, their mental health in place, they know how to be happy within themselves, then they're not constantly looking to see whose fault it is that they're miserable, and it changes their relationships. And so, that really is the sequence I find to be most helpful. Build positive, healthy individuals that then learn how to engage in healthy ways with each other.
And I believe that this book is going to be that kind of tool in bringing people to be able to be their healthy, positive person so that they can enjoy the richness of good relationships. Carrie, this has been so delightful. Thank you for sharing your time with us. I would love for you to share with us how we can find out more about you.
Sure. The easiest way, I have a number of different websites. They're all accessible from my main website, which is carriewrigley.com.
Okay.
Right on there, you can, there's a link that takes you right to the book and the new workbook that just came out last August that is a shorter version of the same information, makes it more accessible, more practical, more hands-on. It's great for teenagers and just kind of get a quicker head start. Excellent. So that's on there. Links to the music, links, for people that might want to, look into coming and see me professionally, that, there's links to that, links to different things, talks that I've done, videos that I've done. So carriewrigley.com is kind of the gateway to all the other stuff. I've got music online. I've got, articles, books, videos. All of it is accessible from carriewrigley.com.
Excellent. So we can get your beautiful book and the workbook right there on the website.
Yeah, it'll lead you right to Amazon, which will take care of you.
Oh, thank you. I've enjoyed visiting with you, and I've learned a whole lot about our personal relationships, how important that is to stand up and to show up who we are supposed to be and to embrace happiness and joy and fulfillment in our lives. Yeah. And I'm
even in
excited
2022.
for my friends. Yes, especially in 2022.
Yes, absolutely.
If you've enjoyed this episode, remember to subscribe, share, like us on Facebook, and follow us on Instagram. Please comment, because I would love to hear about what you think and what you want to see in the future. I'm no therapist, but I am your host, Stephanie Goodman.